Welcome to this guide for the Erica Synths DB-01 Bassline. Now, since I made my original Essentials video back in 2020, I've since made more than 60 videos about the little DB-01. And that surprised even me, but I think it's because this is way more than just a little bassline machine. It is a very surprisingly powerful synth, a fantastic mono sequencer. It's got all sorts of deep options on it, and maybe above all, it's just a lot of fun to play with. And the more you get to know it, the more fun you will have. So what do you get in the box? Obviously the machine. You get a manual. I highly recommend reading the manual myself. I like reading manuals, but maybe others not so much. Still, it's a good manual. And of course, a power supply. Now this power supply comes with a range of little heads to suit all sorts of geographic locations, and they just slot into place. The other good thing about the power supplies is that they are common to most Erica Synths machines. For example, this same power supply will power the Zen Delay, the LXR02, the Acid Box 3, Perkins, all these things. Let's have a quick look at the back panel, and yes, I do have two machines, and I've got a few videos about why it is such fun to have two machines. Anyway, power input, on-off switch, clock in and out, full MIDI in and out, although the MIDI spec is extremely limited, so don't expect miracles there. A range of little CV options, and a mono out. Now this machine is factory fresh, so it's as you will probably receive one. Switch it on, DB-01, so 120, that refers to the tempo. If you want to change the tempo, here is the tempo knob. It does a lot of other things. In fact, it doesn't even say tempo, it says back and note. This one's select and gate, so these two knobs, which are push encoders, they do a lot of stuff. The other button that you'll be using a lot is this button over here, which is the shift button. So between these three, these two encoders, push button encoders, and this shift button, they will be the main interface controllers. Now another thing, this back note button here, it's also your sort of escape key in a lot of ways. If you're in different sorts of modes and you go, what's going on? Hit the back button here, you go back to normal sequencer mode. Now what you'll probably want is to hear some sound straight away. Now if we press the play button, because here we've got shift, play, stop and record, well, we're not hearing anything, and that's because, as you can see, all these knobs are wound back. Let's put some notes into the little sequencer. Still not hearing anything, but we see these two lights here, which are the envelopes, the filter envelope and the amp envelope. They're lighting up, indicating that something is going on. Let's turn most of these things up to about 50%. Drive, detune, the sub oscillator, envelope amount. What we'll leave for now is the LFO amount and the LFO rate. We'll get into that in great detail a bit later. Here's the wave selection, sawtooth, square, and we've also got the filter, low pass filter, band pass filter. Here is FM amount, which is tied very much to the LFO controls, but to avoid making just horrible noises, leave the FM control down. There's also some noise. So for some instant gratification, we can just play around with all these controls. Have a bit of fun. the next thing you'll probably want to do is to change the note. So if you press and hold one of the ones that you've already put in, you'll see 3C. So that's the third octave, C. If you want to change that, C sharp, D, etc. We can also go down an octave. So 3C, and you'll see here, octave down, octave up, 2C, 4G. And of course, we can do that while it's running. Now you might ask what this other button is for. Well, if we press and hold a step, change this button, we're getting an amount there that goes up in tens from 10 to 100. That is the gate length. So to hear that in action, let's change some of the gate lengths. We'll make that 100. So we can hear the gate length change there, but if you turn up the amp envelope, you're not really going to hear that gate length anymore. That's already getting pretty nuanced, but good just to cover what these things do straight away. Now if you want to get rid of these, you can just press the buttons and they're gone. Now the other way you can play is manually playing, so using these buttons like a little keyboard. To get into that mode, Shift play. So you hold down Shift, press play, it says key, so you're in keyboard mode. And if you can see the lighting differences here, it's a little bit difficult, but here are 3 black notes, here's 2 black notes, 2 black notes, so you can sort of see there's a little keyboard layout. So now we can play it as a little keyboard. And then don't forget we've got octave up and down. They work in this mode as well. You see the light come on. A bit darker as we go down in octaves. Back up again. Now one thing you might have noticed here already is that although we've got a lot of pretty traditional synth controls, what we haven't got is a volume knob. There is no volume knob. If you want to change the volume, go Shift and then press the last little button here that gets you into the configuration menu. It's octave up. Now we see these lights come on, and each one of these lights is something in the main configuration menu. Actually, while we're here, it's worth checking. You'll see the word scrolling through there, version, press and hold, 1.10. That's the firmware version that we're on. But what we want is volume, and that is this one here. It says play mode, but in the configuration menu it's volume. Press and hold here. This will show the current volume, 127. Well, it goes all the way up to 255, and I've heard some people get a bit concerned about all this because when they start configuring things to play nicely with other machines, they go, I've got to turn this down so far. Is that normal, or is it some terrible malfunction? No, it's not some terrible malfunction. I typically have mine anywhere from, well, 20 to 40. As it is though, I've got this set up for the original volume, so I'll leave it up here, 130. We'll go Shift play. That's fine. If you find the whole lack of a volume knob a bit disturbing, a good solution, I think, is something like this. You get a EQ pedal which has just got a little bit of a dB boost or cut on it, and then this becomes your volume slider. In practice though, I haven't found it really to be an issue. While we're on sound matters, there's one little modification I always make, and that is plugging in a little patch cable. And if we go to the back, we've got a CV out, which is pitch, and over here we've got cutoff CV in. So now the pitch voltage is going to the filter amount. The result of that is that now we have tracking. Myself, I always have this cable in that position. I like a bit of tracking, but try it yourself. Put the cable in, have it in, pull it out, see what a difference it makes. It may be something that you like. Now, we've already looked at putting in notes manually by hitting the little steps and then holding it down. And there we've got a little sequence. But we've also got the little record button here, so obviously we can record live as well. So let's go into keyboard mode. Let's play our sequence. Now we hit the record button. Now whatever we hit on this keyboard will be recorded into the sequence. And of course, being a mono synth, it is recorded over whatever we already had, and it's been quantized to these 16 steps. But yeah, it's pretty bad, isn't it? So let's just get rid of that. You may think, oh no, if only we had have saved that. Well, the quick way of saving is to go Shift Record, and you'll watch this little display here. Came up SAV, save. So Shift Record. So now we've saved this sequence. So if we do the same thing again, we hit play, go into keyboard mode, hit record, and you go, well, yeah, that was all right, but not so great maybe. Hold down select and go back, and you see the display. It's now gone back to our last saved version. So let's change some of these notes. And, well, we can do it when it's running. Save that. Then we add a whole lot of other things, and we go, oh no, ruined the great pattern. Select, back, and we've gone back to our saved version. Let's slow it down. Now already you may say, well, that's a great start. I'll save that again just to make sure we've got it. Save. Now I want to go to a new pattern. So Shift, and you see written up here pattern. Shift, pattern. Patterns which already have some data in it are bright. The ones that are empty are a bit dimmer. To select another pattern to go to, just press the button. Now we're in that pattern. We could be here. If you press and hold, you'll see the number come up 3. Well, let's just go to pattern 2. Again, to get out of this mode, press the back key. Now we're in pattern 2. It's empty. So at this point, you may already be thinking, well, time to interface with some other gear, maybe put an external clock in it. Let's go into the configuration menu. You recall it was Shift and octave up. Here are all the configuration options. Let's start at the left. Clock, you'll see it scroll through there. Press and hold, select to see the options, and the options here are internal, external, and MIDI. So internal is obviously just this rate here. External is for the analog clock, so the clock in, and MIDI is going to be waiting for a MIDI clock coming in on the MIDI DIN port there. So we've got it on MIDI. Now you'll see that the tempo display has shifted to show 0, and this, which formerly controlled the tempo amount, does nothing. So there's a clue. If you're on MIDI clock, tempo display will be 0. If you press play, it's not going to play anything. If we go shift pattern, go back to pattern 1 where we know that there's something in there, still showing 0, press play, nothing's going to happen. It's waiting for a MIDI clock. So here's a MIDI clock going to come in here, and there it is at the external clock rate now, 74. And if we try to change again the tempo, not going to do anything. It's under MIDI clock control. So let's go back into the configuration menu, shift octave plus. So that's clock. Next one, MIDI in. Press and hold. This is the MIDI in channel. You can also select off. MIDI out. Again, off to 16. There's also through. MIDI clock. So this is whether you're going to send a MIDI clock from the out port. We've got it off. BRUF, which is bar follow. Now that means if you've got multiple bars of information, so instead of 16 steps, let's say you had 64 steps, this will determine whether the display will follow those groups of steps. So as the sequence plays, it'll show the first 16, the next 16, or will it just sit at the first lot of 16 steps, and it'll be up to you to select what bar you want to look at. A little bit nuanced, but this can be very useful if you're programming a 64-step pattern and you just want to look at, say, the third lot of steps. So instead of it jumping around, you can concentrate on one thing rather than another. By default, it's off. I might leave it off. Volume, we've already looked at. Tuning, we're at 440. You can change it, obviously, if you want to. Backup. So here you can create an audio file backup of all your patterns and various settings. Cal is calibration. So this is an automatic tuning routine. So if you press here, it'll start calibrating. It doesn't make a horrible squealing sound or anything like that. It'll just run through, it'll tune up the oscillator, make sure it's bang on whatever you've selected for tuning there, 440. And, well, occasionally it can drift out, very rarely, but if I was playing live or recording multiple takes or something like that, I'd probably just go through the Calibrate routine, because you can see it only takes a few seconds just to be 100% sure it was perfectly in tune. Normally though, day to day, I would never bother. Reset, this is for a factory reset. It'll wipe out absolutely everything. If you've bought a unit second hand or something like that, this is something you may want to do, but otherwise, factory reset is the nuke option. And lastly, version, which we have already looked at. Press and hold here to see the version number. And again, press the back key to get out of configuration options. Now, so far we've skipped over the synth controls because you want to experiment with them on your own, see what you can get out of it. It's just a lot of fun to noodle around with at great length. But the one thing perhaps in the synth controls that it is worth looking at in real detail, and that is these two, the LFO rate and the LFO level. And you've got a little indicator light here showing the LFO rate. It can be synced or unsynced. There's a lot of options with it, And it's really one of the keys of getting a great bassline sound. In every sound you do, in every pattern you do, the LFO should be doing something. One poor, sad, solitary little note there. Let's turn up the LFO. And it can go very slow. It's obviously affecting the filter. Or we can speed it up to the extent that we're getting into FM terrain. Now, that's as far as some LFOs in the world go, but here we've got a huge number of options, and this is where all the power is. Shift, and you see all these different options down here, which we'll get into shortly, but we'll just look at the LFO first. So Shift, LFO. Now what the display is showing is that LFO. So if we turn up the speed, there's the LFO. Let's hit the play button. If we go up into maximum speed, we're getting that sort of situation. But if we wind the select button all the way to the left so we can go through all the options, the first option here is shape. So this is where we select the LFO shape. Let's wind this one all the way to the left, so we'll start at the beginning. So we've got sine, triangle, saw, speed it up a little bit, ramp, square, triple down saw. So you can sort of hear it progressively going down, a bit like a delay. Double saw triangle. Then we've got TAR, which is triple ascending ramp. This was added in a much later firmware version. So that's a very interesting one. And sample and hold for that. Random feel. Lastly, noise. So a lot of interesting creative options there, which make a big difference to how things go. Let's continue on. Sync. So sync is talking about the incoming clock. So it can either be on or off. If we put sync on, now this control shows ratios of the incoming clock. So it's on, reset. And if it's on, it'll reset the LFO whenever a note hits. If it's off, it'll just keep obeying the clock. So let's leave it off for now. Next option is phase. So you'll hear at the moment, let's put it on 8. You hear at the moment because of the phase, it seems to be re-hitting somewhere around there. So if we adjust the phase, we'll hear that saw shape peak at a different place. So this is where you can get lost in this machine for hours fiddling around with things like that. But we'll keep the phase at 90 degrees. Now range, this is the whole sort of speed of the LFO. It can be low, which means now that the LFO rate can be incredibly slow, down to 64. It still goes pretty fast. But not as fast as if you have it in high range. If you have it in high range, it's still synced to the clock. Now you can get into those, still get into those FM-like tones, but it only goes down to 16, whereas if you have it in low range, you go right down to 64. I'll just put it in high range just because when you get around these sort of mid-level speeds, you get a lot more options. So you can go into 3 and 6 and all sorts of interesting little gradations like that. So that's range, and those are the LFO options. So I've gone into that in incredible detail just because you can get some really interesting effects happening with the LFO, with the sync speeds, with the phase, the different shapes, and just adjusting the timing and the amount. It's one of the real strengths of the DB-01, so it's worth fiddling around with the LFO, having a bit of fun with that for some time. Now the other thing that's connected to the LFO is the FM amount. So if we wind up the FM amount, then the LFO determines, will turn off the filter amount, so now it's just the shape of the LFO affecting the FM amount. So it takes a bit more fiddling to get something really good happening, but that's what the FM is connected to. Now you would have noticed there's quite a few options there in the LFO, and also of course there's no saving sounds in the DB-01. But what you can do is save some of the main settings. So for example, the LFO setting can be saved. So if you go into the LFO mode and you think to yourself, well, I really like how I had it saw and the sync was on and the reset was off and the phase was 90, it was all exactly as I wanted it, that was great. I want to have that on all my sounds, or at least the default starting position on all the sounds and all the patterns. Then what you do is adjust it how you like it, and then you just press and hold the record button. And you see now it's come up with SAV, save. So press and hold the record button, save. Now everything, all the patterns in this particular bank are going to start with those LFO settings. And we haven't even looked at banks. So if we go, remember how we went shift pattern and we were selecting different patterns. I forgot to save pattern 3, so there's going to be nothing there now. But anyway, that's how we select patterns. Well, in the same way, select banks. So shift bank. Now we're in bank 2. We go shift pattern. We can see all the patterns are empty. So at the moment now we're in pattern 4, bank 2. And if we look at the LFO now, it's defaulted to sine wave. But if we go back to shift bank, bank 1, pattern whatever, now we look at the LFO, get back into our clock sync and our shape sawtooth. Now there's one other common thing when you're creating patterns in a sort of semi-random, punching in things and moving notes around. You might decide that in fact this should be the start of the pattern. So there's nothing worse than creating a great pattern and then discovering that the start isn't really at the start. So what you can do, hold down the Shift button. See, you've got these two little arrows here, and you just press it and you see that everything is moving to the left by 1. Release the Shift button, and now here is the start point. Or you can go the other way, whatever. Now there's the start point, and if you want to save that, you remember Shift, Record, you see SAV come up, so that's the quick save. Or maybe you'd want to save this version as a variation, so you go Shift, Pattern. You don't want to save it pattern 1, you want to save it somewhere else, so you'd go select the pattern slot where you want it to save. So how about 2? Now we've saved it in 2. So let's look at that again. Shift Pattern. We could do the quick save, Shift Record, but if we wanted to put it somewhere else, select the slot, and you go, oh, okay, slot 5 here, and then quickly hit the Record button, and now it's saved into there, or copied into there, whatever you prefer. So let's now look at a few more of the functions here. We've already looked at pattern and bank and LFO. So you notice here we've got copy and paste. Hold down the note, it displays what it is, and you can go up here and you see CPY come up, copy. So we've copied that into the buffer, and now and the one next to it is paste, so we can go paste, paste, paste. Or we could go Shift Copy and select a note range, so here to here. So we've copied this entire section here. Now we're in paste mode, and it'll stay in that paste mode. And you remember, we copied this entire section, so now wherever we hit a button, it's going to paste that entire lot. Back to get out of that mode, and now we see, well, let's have a listen to the dog's breakfast we've made. So we've looked at pattern, bank, copy and paste. Let's have a look at one that I really like, and that is the random pattern generator. First of all, we'll go to an empty pattern though. So Shift Pattern, something that's dimly lit is empty. Empty pattern, Shift, random pattern. Now, if you're feeling particularly lucky or brave, you can hit this button here, which randomizes absolutely everything. You've got to be remarkably lucky to come up with anything decent, but let's see what it's given us. Okay, suitably terrible, but let's keep pushing it and see whether we can get lucky. Yeah, well, in my experience, it very rarely comes up with anything good, and that's because it's randomizing through the absolute full range of everything. So it's the entire note range, entire modulation range. It'll put its slides and accents and pitch envelopes in there. And so usually it's going to sound pretty terrible. Sometimes you might get a reasonable starter from it though, but pretty rare. So let's forget about that and just reload back into our empty pattern. Let's go back into the random pattern generator. Now, to a degree, these names along here will give you a clue to what's going on. They're not all accurate, but pretty close. So let's hit play. We're not hearing anything because we haven't entered any info. This button here says last step, but in fact, that will enter just a selection of gates. And if you go back, you can see the gates that it's added quite a few. Maybe we'd like something not quite so busy, so you press and hold the gate amount. Well, 50% chance that a step is going to get a gate. Let's change that down to 20%. Okay, not bad. This one is going to be gate length. And again, we can select the range of the gate length. So the range of the gates is going to be from 10% to 100%. So just hitting these two, actually let's turn that up a bit. So 40% chance a step will have a step in it, and then different gate ranges. So that's not too bad. Modulation is filter modulation, so let's hit that. So those are the three that I like to play with: filter modulation, gates, and gate length. Between those three, you can get some pretty interesting things happening, and then the rest I think is pretty good just to add manually as a human. Now the exception to that might be scale, and that's another option down here. So let's get out of the randomizer and go Shift Scale. So this selects like a scale locking mode for the machine. So here, major, minor, all sorts of whole tone, blues, and then user scales. So say I've got a whole video that covers all this, but let's just go into minor, and then we can select the note. Let's go E minor. Here's the notes that it's going to use. So we've selected the scale E minor. Let's go back into random pattern. This is the button for the scale range. You can select the bottom note or the low note. So let's say 1C, and then you can, well, let's leave it as a high range. So there's our pattern. Let's now hit pitch randomizer. So it's not too bad because it's locked to scale, but it's pretty high. So let's wind back the available top note. That's not bad. Let's try it again though. Let's keep that. Let's go Shift Record for a quick save. So the randomizer, it's a beautiful thing. Let's go to an empty pattern. Let's look at that scale function again. Let's go back to, I'll keep it on D minor, say. Now, if we go to the manual keyboard mode, which you recall Shift play, and now this is a little keyboard. Now this is locked to whatever scale we selected as well. So let's have a look at some of these other functions down here. So Shift ACC, that's accent. So Shift accent, this is our little pattern that we've got. Wherever we hit accent, it'll brighten up a little bit, and there'll be just a little tiny boost on those steps, and depending on the pattern it may be very, very subtle. Shift slide will add slides between the notes that you select. And the more different they are between notes for the slide to go to, the greater the effect that you'll hear. Not a huge fan of the slide function myself. Let's keep going. The pitch envelope is an interesting one. Press and hold where you want it. The first one is, how long should that envelope be? Like a very short little envelope or a long envelope. The range is 1 to 9. And the second one is the intensity. Again, 1 to 9. So 1, 9 is the shortest, sharpest envelope you can have, pitch envelope. Not hearing much. This envelope control here will really emphasize it. Triangle wave also helps you hear it more clearly. Let's put one here. Let's make it about 9 and 9. So that's as powerful and as long as it can be. Let's make the intensity a bit less. So you can see quite a difference between those two effects. Let's copy that. Paste, paste, paste. And then we'll copy this one. Paste, paste, paste. Just so you can hear the difference there. Let's keep going again. We've reverted to the last saved version of that pattern. Let's go to Shift last step. L for last step. Now you can use the controls here. So F will be the first step. L is the last step. You can wind it all the way up to 64 steps if your pattern's that long. Or you can wind it back. So let's say last step is 8. Or you can do it this way. You can just hold 2 steps. So, a bit of fun there. Now the other thing about first and last steps is you can use this to make your sequence up to 64 steps long. So there we are, we've wound it up to 64 steps. Now we're not hearing anything because it's playing those steps outside of this 16-step range, and as you recall, when we were in the configuration menu, we chose to have broof. Where's broof? Bar follow off, so it's not going to follow those steps. Now we've turned it on, so here's the bar selection. Go into the second bar, go into the third bar, go into the fourth bar. And now if we play, and you can use these arrows here. It says bar, you've got arrows left and right we can use, and you see B1, B2, B3 for B4, so we can inspect what's on those bars. And because we've got bar follow on, now when we hit play, it'll show us, the display will change. And we see what's on each of those bars. And if we go to last step, wind the last step back to 16, well, it'll just play those first 16, but all those other steps are still there if we wind it back up again. Oh, did I forget mod? I forgot mod. Let's go to an empty pattern. Let's put some steps in. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. Go Shift Mod, press and hold a step, and you'll select how much filter modulation you want on that step. And that's going to be relative to whatever this knob happens to be on. And the other way you can do it is just to go into record mode, hit play, and start moving the filter knob around. Play mode, actually we'll go into a more complex pattern for play mode. So there's a horrible pattern there. Go into play mode. These are the ways the pattern can play back: forward, backward, ping pong 2, or random. So that's going backwards, ping pong 2, where it plays the first and last step twice, or random. Now there's a whole other mode within the play mode functionality. Now the right button here controls the playback type, but the left knob controls probabilities. And if you take the dial and swing it to the right, you'll get a percentage probability that that particular note will play. So that's still at 100%. This one is at 10%. 25, 50, 75, 90, 100. Now if you swing it to the left, now you get the play type. So it'll play 7 times out of 8, or 3 out of 4, 2 out of 3, 1 out of 2, etc. Now at the moment though, even if you go, well, you'll play 1 out of 6, it will play the first time, and then there'll be 5 empty bars, and then it'll play again. It'd be nicer if it was the other way around, like for example the Perkins was just modified to do, so it'd play 5 empties and then the 6th one it would play, but it is what it is. With any luck, a firmware update will get that changed. Still useful for getting in those variations. And we'll go to TRA, which is Transpose. Here's a little keyboard. We can go up in octaves. Let's play. And this is transposing. Arp is a good one. If you press and hold now, plays back according to the Arpegiator options. Direction is the direction of the arpeggiation, so random, up, down, down, up. And we've got octaves. Gate length. So this is independent of what you might have selected here. So this is the default sound of the machine. So if we just play the machine, that's the default sound, but you can set a separate arpeggiation gate length, so the arpeggiator gate length might be a bit longer. So for example, so we're getting a much longer gate length on the arpeggiation. Now that can be a very useful and interesting thing to do while playing over the top of a pattern. The pattern of the arpeggiation itself, well, 1, 2 and 3, it's just a relative straight speed. 4 introduces a bit of a pattern. In PIA, it's like a normal arpeggiator. Actually, let's put it back to pattern number 1. So, PIA is the plain arpeggiation mode that people are familiar with. STP is step arpeggiator mode. So it will arpeggiate through whatever steps you hold in the pattern that you've already programmed. So this is the pattern that we've already programmed. And then we can choose notes which are in that pattern to arpeggiate, or we can even hold down empty steps for a little break. So there we have it. That's the basics of the DB-01. There's so much you can do. There's so much to explore. You're going to have a great time. Until next time. See ya.